is the Apocrypha. You brothers and sisters can purchase this online. Okay, this book is called the Apocrypha. It's another part of the Bible that was taken out, okay, by Martin Luther, then later on the Roman Catholic Church.
Greetings. In this video I'll be discussing the claims of UPKers regarding the so-called Apocrypha. As a quick note, the term UPKers is a general reference to those sects of the Black Hebrew Israelite movement who descend from the old Israelite Church of Universal Practical Knowledge. Anyway, I've previously made videos which have been critical of certain arguments pushed by a group of former UPKers which refer to themselves as Rebel Alliance Media, which I'm just going to call the RAM. In this video, however, I wanted to speak positively about one of their positions. This video has been inspired by videos put out by the gentleman in the RAM, and I wanted to make this video since last February when the Rebel Alliance Media came out with a segment on Google videos titled Defend the Faith or Shut Up, which had a section on the Israelite Church of God and Jesus Christ's erroneous teachings about the so-called Apocrypha. The two gentlemen in Rebel Alliance Media criticized their former church for teaching that the Catholic Church is responsible for removing the so-called Apocrypha from the King James Bible. Now, that teaching is patently false, and it's obviously false to anyone with even a basic knowledge of the controversy between Catholics and Protestants over the canon of the Bible. This is a subject which has interested me for a while, so it was refreshing to see Rebel Alliance Media tackle it. This subject first interested me back in around 2004 when I would browse the forum of the Holy Conception Unit site, which was the official webpage of the Israelite Church of God and Jesus Christ. I was surprised to see on that forum that the teachers from the Israelite Church of God and Jesus Christ were flatly saying that the Roman Catholic Church removed the Apocrypha from the King James Bible and that Catholics don't use the Apocrypha and so on. Elsewhere on the internet, I saw members of another splinter group, the Israelite School of Universal Practical Knowledge in Washington, D.C., saying the same thing. And I'm also a member of the Truth After Knowledge group, and the Truth After Knowledge forum. On there, I've seen UPKers from different groups who've appeared and claimed that the Roman Catholic Church removed the Apocrypha from the King James Bible. As you saw at the beginning of this clip, there's Bun Lawyer, who's a former member of the House of Israel group, and is now apparently with a new group called Lions of Israel, and he also claimed the Roman Catholic Church removed the Apocrypha. What's fascinating about this subject is that some of these people have been separated from one another for nearly a decade and a half, yet they're still pushing the same claim about the Roman Catholic Church removing the Apocrypha from the Bible. What this means is that for the last 14 years, none of the different groups has bothered to do even 30 seconds worth of research on the subject. That speaks volumes about how little study the average UPKer does. Anyway, this video is specifically in response to the slight modification that the Great Millstone Group has made to this common UPKer tradition. Rather than just saying the Roman Catholic Church took the Apocrypha out of the Bible, they quote some fringe book titled To Eliminate the Opiate, which makes a passing reference to an obscure group called the Biblical Destruction Group. And from there, the men in Great Millstone leap to the conclusion that this group removed the so-called Apocrypha from the King James Bible in 1826. They don't provide any evidence, rather they just put the claim out there for their followers to take on faith. Even though they have shifted the blame from the Roman Catholic Church to some alleged biblical destruction group, the argument is basically the same. It shows a complete ignorance of the history of the disputes over the biblical canon, and it assumes that the so-called Apocrypha was taken out of the Bible, specifically by the white man or something like that, some shadowy group, and that he did so because he was afraid of the content in the Bible, in the Apocrypha. So, for example, listen here to one of the members of Great Millstone explaining which verses the white man was afraid of, thus motivating him to remove the so-called Apocrypha. Here's the clip.
Focusing on the Apocrypha and why it was taken out, but this is one of the scriptures why I believe it was taken out. All right, 2nd Ezra 6, 7-9. Now, the two others that I have written down is 2nd Ezra 13, 40-46, which describes about the 10 tribes coming over here to the Western Hemisphere. All right, I believe that's another reason why they had to take that out. And also 1st Maccabees, the 1st chapter, the 1st verse to the 9th verse, which speaks about Alexander the Creep coming into power. And it also says that when Alexander came into power, that's when wickedness was sown into the planet Earth. So basically, according to 1st Maccabees 1 and 9, It's basically telling you when the white man came into power, the so-called white man came into power underneath Alexander, that's when wickedness was sown in the earth. So what is it essentially calling the so-called white man? The wicked. So, you know, they couldn't have that information out there.
All right, to highlight how ridiculous their argument is, first note that the book they call Second Esdras is still in the Bibles of the Russian Orthodox Church, where it's listed as Third Ezra. It also appears in the Bibles of Eastern Rite Catholics who use Slavonic, such as the so-called Uniates, who are similar to the Russian Orthodox Church, only they're in communion with the Pope. As for First Maccabees, that appears in all the Bibles of the Catholic and Orthodox churches. Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, Roman Catholic, with their Eastern or Western rites, all of them have First Maccabees in their Bibles. These facts fly in the face of the claim that, the white man is terrified of these books and had to remove them from the Bible. So we should now ask the question, why do the books appear in some Bibles and not in others? And the answer has nothing to do with the wacky conspiracy theories that UPKers are pushing. Instead, it has to do with the belief held by many Christians that the Old Testament should reflect the biblical canon of the Jews. Now let's run through a brief history of the issue and try and bring this out. As I just noted, throughout history there have been certain Christians who believe the Old Testament should mirror the Jewish canon. The problem is that the Jewish canon wasn't solidified until centuries after the dawn of Christianity. By the time the Jewish canon was solidified into what we today call the Tanakh, Christians had already been long using books not found in that canon, such as Judith, Tobit, Wisdom, Sirach, and the books of the Maccabees. One popular claim is that the Jewish canon was closed at the Council of Jamnia, which is also called Yavne, around 100 AD. Now that claim is now rejected by serious scholars. For example, the Encyclopedia Judaica states, quote, "The widely held, though unsupported view that the formal and final canonization of the Ketuvim accorded the Synod of Yavne in 100 CE has to be considerably modified." Now, proof of this position is the fact that the Babylonian Talmud in Baba Kama 92b, Tractate Baba Kama 92b, has a portion where one of the rabbis quotes the book of Sirach, also called the Ecclesiasticus in the King James Apocrypha, and they quote Sirach as if it were part of the Ketuvim, i.e., which is the third part of the Tanakh. The great modern Talmudic scholar Adin Steinsaltz himself wrote that, quote, "Even in the Talmud, the book of Ben Sirach is quoted as though it were scripture, and in some places it is hinted that the passages are indeed scriptural." This means that possibly as late as the 3rd century, the Jewish canon was still in a state of flux. It was still fluid. Whatever the case, as the canon became more solid, Christians began to take notice. Now I'm talking about the Jewish canon. As the Jewish canon became solid, Christians took notice, and in book 6 of his ecclesiastical history, Eusebius gives the Jewish canon as listed by Melito of Sardis, and also the canon listed by Origen. Both these men gave lists which were very close to the Tanakh as it is today. Melito's list was written in the 2nd century, and it lacked the book of Esther and possibly included the book of Wisdom, but other than that it was the same as the Tanakh. Origen's list for the Old Testament included the Epistle of Jeremiah, which corresponds with the 6th chapter of Baruch, and might have included the first book of Maccabees, but that's a longer subject. The point is, by the time of such figures in the church, in the early churches, Melito and Origen, in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, the Jewish canon already lacked most of the books which appear in the so-called Apocrypha. Now, in the 4th century, the Jewish canon, if the Jewish canon wasn't fully solidified, it had almost reached that point, and thus we see, certain church fathers starting to appeal to the truncated Jewish canon as the true Old Testament. Most famously, Saint Athanasius, in his 39th Festal Letter, plainly presents the Old Testament canon, which is nearly identical to the Tanakh, to the Jewish canon, except for the fact that his canon lacked the book of Esther and it contained Baruch. Now, Athanasius goes on to state that specifically the books of Judith, Wisdom, Sirach, Esther, and Tobit are not part of the canon, but are good for, at least good for catechetical instruction. That's something important to keep in mind, that distinction. They're not canonical, but you can use them for, they're good for reading, especially for people undergoing catechesis. Now, there were other church fathers who took a similar view, but the problem reached its zenith in St. Jerome, who's the translator of the Vulgate. In his preface to his translation of the books of Kings, popularly called the Prologos Geleatus, Jerome flatly stated that books like Wisdom, Sirach, Tobit, and Judith are not part of the canon. And he explained that because they're not part of the Hebrew canon of the Jews, that is the Tanakh, they have to be considered apocryphal. And we should keep in mind that he used the word apocrypha as a slur.